You've been lied to about respect. They told you it's earned through kindness, built through trust, and cultivated through years of good behavior. They convinced you that if you work hard enough, stay humble enough, and prove yourself worthy enough, respect will naturally follow. But while you've been politely waiting for recognition that never comes, others have been taking what you thought had to be earned. Tonight, Niccolo Machiavelli shatters your comfortable illusions with a truth so brutal it will reshape how you see every power dynamic in your life. Respect is forced, not seeked. In the grand theater of human power, there exists no more devastating mistake than confusing respect with popularity, authority with likability, or command with consensus. This confusion has created generations of people who spend their lives begging for recognition from those who will never freely give it, who waste decades proving their worth to audiences that judge worth by power rather than virtue, who exhaust themselves seeking approval from systems designed to extract their energy while providing minimal acknowledgement in return. Tonight we enter the mind of history's most ruthless analyst of political reality, Niccolo Machiavelli, whose insights pierce through centuries of moral mythology to reveal how respect actually operates in the real world. We will explore why those who seek respect inevitably find contempt, why begging for recognition guarantees its denial, and why the capacity to force respect through credible consequences is not cruelty, but the foundation of all legitimate authority. Through Machiavelli's unflinching examination of how princes maintain power and subjects maintain dignity, through his understanding that fear and love can coexist but respect requires the capacity for strategic intimidation, through his recognition that strength commands attention while weakness invites exploitation, through his analysis of why those who cannot enforce their standards will see those standards ignored by others who understand that consequences create compliance more effectively than conscience, and through his insights into why the person who can withdraw benefits as well as provide them gains more genuine respect than those who can only give. We will uncover the sophisticated mechanics of commanding rather than requesting the recognition you deserve. By the end of this Machiavellian masterclass, you will understand why respectful people often appear cold to those addicted to warmth, why authority figures seem harsh to those who mistake authority for friendship, and why learning to force respect through strategic consequence creation is not moral failure, but the prerequisite for moral effectiveness in a world that respects power more than principles. The question that will determine whether you continue begging for scraps of recognition or command the respect your capabilities deserve is this: are you ready to stop seeking respect from those who will never give it freely and start forcing respect from those who only understand the language of credible consequences? Machiavelli's foundation, the illusion of earned respect. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something that destroys most people's understanding of human nature. Respect is not a moral category, but a political one. It flows not from virtue, but from power, not from deserving, but from demanding, not from earning, but from the capacity to make disrespect costly for those who might otherwise ignore your worth, dismiss your contributions, or treat you as dispensable. The fundamental error that keeps people powerless is believing that respect operates like a transaction, that if you input enough good behavior, hard work, and moral conduct, respect will be output as a natural consequence. This transactional thinking ignores the brutal reality that respect is a finite resource that people guard jealously and distribute strategically based on what serves their interests rather than what rewards your virtue. Machiavelli observed that princes who believed they could earn subjects' respect through benevolence alone invariably found themselves betrayed by those same subjects the moment benevolence became inconvenient or alternatives became available. Subjects respected not the prince's goodness, but his power to reward loyalty and punish betrayal. Without this power, goodness became irrelevant to political survival. This principle operates with equal force in personal relationships, professional environments, and social interactions. The colleague who believes they can earn respect through exceptional performance alone discovers that exceptional performance without the power to demand recognition often results in increased workload without increased acknowledgement. The family member who believes kindness will earn respect finds that kindness without boundaries often results in being taken for granted rather than being valued. The friend who believes loyalty will earn reciprocal respect learns that loyalty without the capacity to withdraw it when mistreated often results in one-sided relationships where their loyalty is assumed rather than appreciated. In each case, the fundamental error is the same: mistaking moral behavior for political power, confusing what should work with what actually works. Machiavelli's insight reveals that respect is not about deserving, but about positioning. Those who command respect have positioned themselves so that disrespecting them carries costs, while respecting them provides benefits. This positioning is not accidental but strategic. It results from conscious decisions about how to structure relationships, interactions, and environments to make respect profitable for others rather than optional. The person who forces respect understands that humans respond more reliably to incentive structures than to moral appeals, to cost-benefit calculations than to ethical arguments, to the consequences of their choices than to the righteousness of different options. They create environments where respecting them serves others' self-interest, while disrespecting them conflicts with others' well-being or advancement. This understanding transforms every interaction from a moral test to a strategic deployment of incentives that encourage the behavior you want, while discouraging the behavior you won't tolerate. Instead of hoping others will choose to respect you, you create conditions where respecting you becomes their optimal choice, based on practical considerations rather than moral inclinations. The Machiavellian approach eliminates the emotional frustration that comes from expecting others to reward your virtue with recognition they may have no motivation to provide. Instead of feeling disappointed when good behavior doesn't generate respect, you focus on building the power necessary to make respect a rational choice for others, regardless of their moral inclinations or personal preferences. The psychology of respect-seeking versus respect-commanding. The psychological difference between those who seek respect and those who command it lies in their fundamental understanding of human nature and social dynamics. Respect seekers operate from what psychologists call an external locus of control, the belief that others' recognition depends on others' decisions about whether to acknowledge their worth. Respect commanders operate from an internal locus of control, the belief that others' recognition depends on their own strategic choices about how to structure interactions and consequences. Respect seekers typically exhibit what Machiavelli would recognize as psychological weakness, disguised as virtue. They accommodate others' preferences to avoid conflict, suppress their authentic needs to maintain relationships, and accept poor treatment to preserve social harmony. They mistake this accommodation for moral superiority while remaining unconscious that it signals to others that they can be disrespected without consequences. The respect seeker approaches relationships like a supplicant approaching a judge, hoping that sufficient evidence of their worthiness will convince others to grant recognition as a reward for good behavior. This approach creates what psychologists call learned helplessness, the belief that outcomes depend on others' decisions rather than your own actions, that respect is something that happens to you rather than something you create. This helplessness manifests as chronic frustration with others who don't appreciate them, resentment toward those who receive recognition despite being less virtuous, and confusion about why good people often finish last while apparently selfish people seem to command respect effortlessly. The respect seeker cannot understand why moral behavior doesn't automatically generate social recognition. Respect commanders, in contrast, understand that social recognition flows from power dynamics rather than moral calculations. They approach relationships like strategists approaching negotiations, focusing not on proving their worth, but on creating incentive structures that make recognizing their worth profitable for others while making disrespect costly or unprofitable. The respect commander doesn't wait for others to decide whether they deserve recognition. They create conditions where recognition becomes the rational choice for others who understand that their cooperation will be rewarded while their disrespect will face consequences. This approach eliminates the emotional dependence on others' moral inclinations that keeps respect seekers perpetually frustrated. Consider how these different approaches manifest in practical situations. When faced with a colleague who takes credit for their work, the respect seeker typically responds by working harder to prove their value, hoping the colleague will eventually acknowledge their contributions out of fairness or guilt. This approach usually results in continued exploitation because it provides no incentive for the colleague to change their behavior. The respect commander, facing the same situation, responds by creating consequences for credit-stealing behavior, documenting contributions more carefully, ensuring visibility with superiors, or strategically withdrawing cooperation until appropriate recognition is provided. This approach addresses the incentive structure that enables exploitation rather than appealing to moral principles that may have no influence on the colleague's behavior. The psychological difference extends to how each type processes setbacks and resistance. Respect seekers interpret others' failure to provide recognition as evidence of their own inadequacy, leading to increased efforts to prove worthiness through more accommodation, harder work, or greater self-sacrifice. This response typically invites further exploitation because it signals that poor treatment will be met with increased giving rather than decreased availability. Respect commanders interpret others' failure to provide recognition as information about power dynamics that need adjustment rather than as judgment of their worth. They respond to disrespect by modifying incentive structures, adjusting consequences, or reallocating their investments to create different outcomes rather than assuming they need to become more deserving of recognition. They're already due. The respect commander develops what Machiavelli would call strategic detachment, the ability to pursue objectives without emotional investment in others' approval or disapproval of those objectives. This detachment allows for much more effective response to resistance because it eliminates the psychological need for others to like the choices that serve your interests. The mechanics of forcing respect. Machiavelli understood that forcing respect operates through sophisticated psychological mechanisms that have nothing to do with intimidation or cruelty, and everything to do with creating clear, consistent, and credible consequence structures that make respecting you the optimal choice for others, regardless of their personal feelings about your methods or character. The first mechanism is what Machiavelli called the establishment of reputation, creating a track record of following through on both promises and threats so that others learn to take your communication seriously rather than testing your boundaries to see if your standards are negotiable. Reputation building requires consistency over time because credibility cannot be established through single incidents but must be demonstrated through patterns that others can predict and rely upon. This reputation must encompass both your capacity to reward those who treat you well and your willingness to impose costs on those who treat you poorly. The person who can only reward but never punish becomes vulnerable to those who understand they can extract benefits without providing reciprocal respect. The person who can only punish but never reward becomes a target for rebellion from those who see no benefit in cooperation. The second mechanism is strategic boundary enforcement, clearly communicating your standards and consistently imposing consequences when those standards are violated, regardless of others' reactions to such enforcement. Boundary enforcement must be prompt, proportional, and inevitable rather than delayed, excessive, or sporadic, because inconsistent consequences teach others that your boundaries are suggestions rather than requirements. Effective boundary enforcement often appears harsh to those accustomed to accommodation because it prioritizes maintaining standards over maintaining comfort. However, this apparent harshness serves both parties by creating clear expectations that prevent the confusion and resentment that arise from unclear or inconsistently enforced boundaries. The third mechanism is resource control, developing the capacity to provide or withdraw benefits that others value, creating dependence that motivates respectful treatment. This doesn't mean manipulating others through artificial scarcity, but rather understanding that respect flows toward those who control access to valuable resources, opportunities, or experiences that others want. Resource control operates through what economists call switching costs, making it expensive for others to replace what you provide, whether that's expertise, connections, emotional support, or practical assistance. The person who makes themselves easily replaceable has little leverage for commanding respect, while the person who provides unique value that cannot be easily obtained elsewhere naturally commands more consideration. The fourth mechanism is alliance building, developing relationships with others who share your standards and will support enforcement of those standards, rather than undermining them through competitive accommodation. Isolated individuals find it difficult to maintain boundaries because they face pressure from all directions, while those who build networks of mutual respect can maintain higher standards because they're not dependent on any single relationship for social or professional support. Alliance building requires choosing associates who demonstrate respect for boundaries in their own lives rather than those who accommodate poor treatment from others. People who allow themselves to be disrespected will often enable others to disrespect you as well, either through direct encouragement or through modeling that disrespect is acceptable as long as it's done politely. The fifth mechanism is strategic escalation, gradually increasing consequences for continued boundary violations rather than accepting ongoing disrespect or immediately resorting to maximum consequences that may be disproportionate to initial violations. Escalation provides opportunities for course correction while demonstrating that disrespectful behavior will become increasingly costly if it continues. Effective escalation follows predictable patterns that others can understand and respond to, rather than arbitrary or emotional responses that appear unstable or unfair. The goal is to create learning opportunities that help others understand how to interact with you successfully, rather than creating confusion or fear that prevents productive relationship. Each of these mechanisms operates through the same underlying principle: creating environments where respecting you serves others' interests while disrespecting you conflicts with their well-being, advancement, or access to resources they value. This creates what Machiavelli called voluntary compliance, cooperation that feels chosen rather than forced, even though it results from strategic incentive structures. The professional application of forced respect. In professional environments, the distinction between seeking and forcing respect becomes particularly crucial because workplace hierarchies often obscure the reality that respect flows upward as well as downward based on power dynamics rather than organizational charts. The employee who understands how to force respect can command recognition regardless of their formal position, while those who only seek respect remain vulnerable to exploitation regardless of their competence or contribution. Professional respect-seeking typically manifests as working longer hours without additional compensation, accepting additional responsibilities without appropriate recognition, or accommodating unreasonable demands to demonstrate commitment and value. These behaviors signal to supervisors and colleagues that the respect seeker can be loaded with more work without consequence, that their boundaries are negotiable, and that they will accept poor treatment as long as it's framed as professional necessity. The professional respect commander approaches workplace dynamics strategically, understanding that respect must be earned through demonstrated value, combined with clear boundaries about how that value can be accessed and utilized. This involves documenting contributions to ensure visibility, negotiating compensation and recognition before accepting additional responsibilities, and establishing clear professional standards that guide interactions with supervisors, colleagues, and subordinates. Consider how these approaches differ when facing a supervisor who regularly assigns urgent projects with unrealistic deadlines. The respect seeker typically responds by working excessive hours to meet impossible demands, hoping the supervisor will eventually recognize their dedication and adjust expectations accordingly. This response usually results in continued unrealistic assignments because it demonstrates that the demands can be met through employee sacrifice. The respect commander responds by clearly communicating what can realistically be accomplished within normal working hours, proposing alternative timelines that allow quality work, and offering choices about which priorities to pursue when resources are insufficient for all demands. If unrealistic demands continue despite clear communication, the respect commander may implement consequences such as allowing quality to suffer when time is insufficient or seeking alternative employment that provides more realistic expectations. The respect commander also understands the importance of strategic visibility, ensuring that contributions are recognized by decision makers rather than remaining invisible to those who control advancement opportunities. This might involve copying supervisors on communications that demonstrate problem-solving capabilities, speaking up in meetings to share insights rather than waiting to be asked, or proactively communicating achievements rather than assuming others will notice and acknowledge good work automatically. Professional alliance building involves developing relationships with colleagues who maintain professional standards rather than enabling workplace dysfunction through accommodation of unreasonable demands or poor treatment. These alliances provide mutual support for maintaining boundaries while reducing isolation that might pressure individuals to compromise standards to maintain social connection. The respect commander develops what might be called professional leverage, specialized skills, unique knowledge, or valuable relationships that make them difficult to replace and expensive to lose. This leverage provides negotiating power for better treatment, appropriate compensation, and reasonable working conditions because it makes accommodating the employee's standards more profitable than forcing their departure. Strategic escalation in professional contexts might begin with direct communication about problems, progress to formal documentation of issues, and culminate in seeking alternative employment if conditions don't improve. Each escalation level provides opportunities for resolution while demonstrating that continued poor treatment will have increasingly significant consequences. The goal is not to become difficult or combative, but to create professional relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. The respect commander can be collaborative and supportive while maintaining clear boundaries about treatment, compensation, and working conditions that serve long-term professional development rather than short-term supervisor convenience. Respect in personal relationship. Personal relationships provide perhaps the most challenging arena for implementing Machiavellian principles because they involve emotional attachments that can cloud strategic thinking and moral considerations that may conflict with effective boundary setting. However, Machiavelli's insights about forced respect apply with equal validity to personal relationships, where accommodation often breeds contempt rather than appreciation. The fundamental error in personal respect-seeking involves believing that unconditional love, unlimited availability, and endless accommodation will generate reciprocal treatment from partners, family members, or friends. This belief ignores the psychological reality that people often value most what they must work to obtain and maintain, while taking for granted what is provided automatically, regardless of their behavior. Romantic relationships illustrate this dynamic clearly. The partner who seeks respect through constant accommodation of their significant other's preferences, unlimited emotional availability, and reluctance to express needs that might create conflict often finds themselves increasingly taken for granted rather than increasingly appreciated. Their accommodating behavior signals that they will maintain the relationship regardless of treatment quality, eliminating incentives for reciprocal consideration. The respect-commanding partner, in contrast, maintains clear boundaries about treatment, expresses needs and preferences directly, and demonstrates willingness to end the relationship if fundamental respect requirements are not met. This approach often generates more appreciation because it creates uncertainty about continued availability that motivates better treatment. Family relationships present particular challenges because they involve history, obligation, and emotional complexity that can make strategic boundary setting feel calculating or cruel. However, family members who accommodate poor treatment indefinitely often enable continued dysfunction while preventing the natural consequences that might motivate family members to develop better relationship skills. The family member who forces respect establishes clear boundaries about treatment, communication, and interaction, while maintaining appropriate love and concern for family members' well-being. This might involve limiting contact with family members who consistently violate boundaries, refusing to enable dysfunction through financial support or emotional accommodation, or requiring respectful communication as a prerequisite for ongoing relationship. Friendship dynamics operate through similar principles. Friends who accommodate poor treatment, accept one-sided relationships, or avoid conflict at all costs often find themselves in relationships that drain more energy than they provide, while failing to receive reciprocal support when needed. The friend who forces respect maintains boundaries about reciprocity, communication quality, and mutual support that create healthier relationship dynamics. Strategic consequence creation in personal relationships often involves emotional rather than financial or professional penalties. This might include withdrawing emotional availability when boundaries are violated, reducing social contact when treatment is poor, or ending relationships that consistently require self-sacrifice without providing reciprocal benefit. The goal is not to become manipulative or calculating, but to create relationships based on mutual respect rather than one-sided accommodation. Personal relationships should enhance rather than diminish participants' well-being, support rather than constrain authentic self-expression, and provide mutual benefit rather than one-sided service. People often resist implementing boundaries in personal relationships because they fear losing connections that feel important or necessary. However, relationships that require your diminishment as the price of maintaining them are not serving your authentic interests and often prevent the development of healthier relationships with people who can appreciate your genuine qualities without requiring constant accommodation. The economics of respect. Machiavelli understood that respect operates according to economic principles. It has supply and demand dynamics, requires investment to develop, and provides returns that can be measured in terms of treatment quality, opportunity access, and social influence. Understanding these economic principles allows strategic deployment of resources to maximize respect returns while minimizing wasted investment in relationships or activities that provide little recognition in return. The scarcity principle operates powerfully in respect dynamics. People tend to value what is scarce and take for granted what is abundant. The person who makes their approval, assistance, or presence easily available to everyone often finds that such availability is valued less than the selective availability of those who are more discriminating about how they deploy their resources. This doesn't mean being artificially scarce or playing games with availability, but rather being strategic about investments of time, energy, and attention based on reciprocal value rather than automatic generosity that may be taken for granted rather than appreciated. The person who helps everyone equally often receives less gratitude than those who help selectively based on established relationships and mutual benefit. The investment principle requires understanding that respect, like other valuable outcomes, requires consistent investment over time to develop and maintain. However, this investment should be strategic rather than indiscriminate, focused on relationships and activities that provide reciprocal benefits rather than one-sided giving that depletes resources without generating corresponding returns. Strategic respect investment involves choosing where to deploy effort based on potential returns rather than moral obligations or social expectations. This might mean investing more heavily in relationships with people who demonstrate reciprocity while reducing investment in those who consistently take more than they provide, or focusing professional development efforts on skills and relationships that enhance recognition rather than just fulfilling job requirements. The leverage principle operates through developing unique value that others cannot easily obtain elsewhere, creating what economists call competitive advantage in social and professional relationships. The person who provides replaceable value has little power to command respect, while those who offer unique capabilities, insights, or resources naturally command more consideration. Building leverage requires continuous development of skills, knowledge, relationships, or resources that others value but cannot easily replicate or replace. This might involve developing specialized expertise, building unique networks, creating valuable content, or providing services that solve problems others cannot address effectively. The portfolio approach involves diversifying respect investments across multiple relationships, contexts, and activities, rather than depending on single sources for recognition or validation. The person who depends on one relationship, job, or social group for all recognition becomes vulnerable to losing respect, if that single source becomes unavailable or changes expectations. Portfolio diversification might involve maintaining professional relationships in multiple industries or organizations, building friendships with diverse groups of people, or developing recognition in several areas of expertise, rather than being known for only one capability or role. The ROI, return on investment principle, requires regular evaluation of which relationships, activities and investments are providing appropriate returns in terms of respect, recognition and mutual benefit, versus those that consume resources without providing corresponding value. This evaluation enables strategic reallocation of limited time and energy toward higher yield opportunities. ROI evaluation involves honest assessment of which people consistently provide reciprocal respect, which activities generate recognition that serves your development, and which investments of effort produce outcomes that justify continued resource allocation versus those that drain energy without providing commensurate benefits. The compound interest principle operates through understanding that respect builds over time when consistently invested and maintained, creating increasing returns as reputation and relationships develop. However, like compound interest, respect building requires patience and consistent behavior rather than seeking immediate returns from individual interactions. Compound respect building involves maintaining consistent standards and boundaries over time, following through on commitments and consequences predictably, and building reputation through repeated demonstrations of competence and reliability, rather than expecting recognition from isolated instances of good performance. The pitfalls of seeking versus the power of commanding. The psychological and practical differences between seeking and commanding respect create entirely different life experiences, relationship qualities, and levels of personal satisfaction. Understanding these differences helps explain why some people effortlessly command recognition, while others struggle for acknowledgement despite significant effort and obvious virtue. Respect-seeking creates what psychologists call external locus of control, the belief that outcomes depend on others' decisions rather than your own choices. This external orientation makes respect feel like something that happens to you based on others' judgment, rather than something you create through strategic action. The result is chronic frustration when others don't provide expected recognition and continuous anxiety about whether current respect levels will be maintained. Respect commanding develops internal locus of control, the understanding that respect results from your strategic choices about how to structure relationships, establish boundaries, and create incentive systems that encourage others to treat you well. This internal orientation makes respect feel reliable because it depends on your actions rather than others' unpredictable moral inclinations. The seeking approach often creates what might be called respect inflation, constantly increasing effort to maintain the same level of recognition as others become accustomed to your availability and accommodation. Like economic inflation, this requires more and more input to achieve the same output, eventually becoming unsustainable and leading to burnout or resentment. The commanding approach creates respect appreciation, increasing recognition over time as others learn that you maintain consistent standards and provide valuable benefits for those who treat you well. This appreciation makes relationships more satisfying and sustainable because they're based on mutual value rather than one-sided accommodation. Respect-seeking often produces what psychologists call learned helplessness, the belief that you cannot control how others treat you and must accept whatever treatment they choose to provide. This helplessness creates depression, anxiety, and resentment that further reduces your attractiveness to others who prefer interacting with confident rather than needy people. Respect commanding develops what might be called learned effectiveness, the understanding that you can influence how others treat you through strategic boundary setting, consequence creation, and value provision. This effectiveness creates confidence and satisfaction that makes you more attractive to others who appreciate strength and self-respect. The seeking approach typically produces relationships characterized by what psychologists call triangulation, indirect communication patterns, where you complain to third parties about poor treatment, rather than addressing issues directly with those who are treating you poorly. This triangulation wastes energy while failing to solve problems because it doesn't change the behavior causing disrespect. The commanding approach creates direct communication patterns where issues are addressed with the people involved through clear communication about standards and consequences. This directness often resolves problems more effectively because it provides specific feedback about what needs to change and what will happen if changes don't occur. Respect-seeking often leads to what might be called virtue signaling exhaustion, constantly trying to prove worthiness through moral superiority, hard work or self-sacrifice that depletes energy without generating corresponding recognition. This exhaustion occurs because seeking validates others' power to grant or withhold respect, rather than establishing your own authority to command it. Respect commanding conserves energy by focusing on strategic boundary setting and value creation rather than moral demonstration. This conservation allows more energy for pursuing authentic objectives and building genuine capabilities that naturally command recognition, rather than draining resources through approval-seeking activities. The seeking mindset often creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, internal conflict between believing you deserve respect and experiencing disrespectful treatment. This dissonance typically resolves through either increased self-blame, "I must not be trying hard enough," or increased resentment toward others, "They don't appreciate good people." The commanding mindset eliminates cognitive dissonance by aligning belief and experience. You believe you deserve respect, and you create conditions that generate respectful treatment. When disrespect occurs, it's addressed through consequence implementation, rather than self-blame or resentment toward others who are simply responding to incentive structures you may have inadvertently created. Building your respect-commanding system. Transforming from respect-seeking to respect-commanding requires systematic development of capabilities, boundaries, and strategic thinking that may feel uncomfortable initially, but becomes increasingly natural as you observe the improved treatment that results from implementing Machiavellian principles in your relationships and activities. Capability development. Begin by identifying and developing skills, knowledge or resources that others value but cannot easily obtain elsewhere. This creates what economists call competitive advantage that makes you more valuable to others while reducing your dependence on any single relationship or opportunity for recognition and respect. Professional capabilities might involve developing expertise in emerging technologies, building specialized knowledge about industry trends, or creating valuable networks that provide access to opportunities others cannot reach independently. The goal is to become someone others need, rather than someone who needs others for basic recognition or advancement. Personal capabilities might involve developing communication skills that help others resolve conflicts, creative abilities that enhance others' projects or experiences, or emotional intelligence that provides support others find genuinely helpful rather than burdensome or demanding. Boundary establishments. Create clear, consistent standards for how you expect to be treated in different relationships and contexts. These boundaries should be based on your authentic values and realistic expectations, rather than wishful thinking about how people should behave or moral rules that others may not share. Professional boundaries might include expectations about communication timing and methods, requirements for advance notice before urgent requests, or standards for credit and recognition when contributing to team projects. These boundaries should be communicated clearly, rather than assumed to be obvious to others. Personal boundaries might involve requirements for reciprocity in friendships, standards for respectful communication in family relationships, or expectations about consideration and compromise in romantic partnerships. The key is consistency, enforcing boundaries reliably rather than making exceptions that teach others your standards are negotiable. Consequence architecture. Develop systematic approaches to rewarding respectful treatment and imposing costs for disrespectful behavior. These consequences should be proportional, predictable, and implemented consistently, rather than being emotional reactions that may seem arbitrary or unfair to others. Positive consequences might include increased availability, enhanced cooperation, or additional assistance for those who demonstrate consistent respect for your boundaries and standards. These rewards should be earned rather than automatic, creating incentives for continued respectful behavior. Negative consequences might include reduced availability, decreased cooperation, or strategic withdrawal of benefits for those who consistently violate boundaries despite clear communication about expectations. These consequences should focus on natural results rather than punishment, allowing others to experience the logical outcomes of their choices. Strategic communication. While learn to communicate expectations, boundaries, and consequences clearly and directly, rather than hoping others will intuit your preferences or assuming they should automatically know how to treat you respectfully. Strategic communication eliminates confusion that might lead to boundary violations and provides clear information about how others can succeed in their relationships with you. Direct communication involves stating preferences clearly rather than hinting or hoping others will guess what you want. This might involve explicitly requesting specific treatment rather than expecting others to demonstrate consideration automatically, or clearly explaining consequences that will follow if boundaries are repeatedly violated. Strategic timing involves choosing appropriate moments for important communications rather than addressing issues when emotions are high or circumstances make productive discussion difficult. The goal is to increase the likelihood that your communication will be heard and understood, rather than dismissed or ignored. Alliance building. Develop relationships with others who maintain similar standards and can provide mutual support for respectful treatment, rather than surrounding yourself with people who accommodate poor behavior and might pressure you to lower your standards to maintain social harmony. Professional alliances might involve building relationships with colleagues who maintain professional boundaries, support quality standards, and refuse to enable workplace dysfunction through accommodation of poor management or unreasonable demands. Personal alliances might involve friendships with people who demonstrate self-respect in their own relationships, family members who maintain appropriate boundaries with difficult relatives, or romantic partnerships with individuals who expect mutual consideration rather than one-sided accommodation. Continuous calibration. What if kratramatawa you et strain to the harbalum? When shall pay to calcin paraftakted? Op comes with constavilus that calibrated, what your tuition, what your sisokan hable, what your tuition, what your tuition, what your tuition dunding petty, dother than boughton compor with stock queuing, to pin. Regularly assess whether your respect-commanding strategies are producing desired outcomes and adjust approaches based on results, rather than maintaining strategies that aren't effective or that may be producing unintended consequences. This calibration involves honest evaluation of whether your boundaries are appropriate versus too rigid or too flexible, whether your consequences are proportional versus too harsh or too lenient, and whether your standards are realistic versus idealistic in ways that set you up for constant frustration. The goal is continuous improvement in your ability to command respect while maintaining authentic relationships that serve mutual development, rather than becoming manipulative or controlling in ways that ultimately undermine the respect you're trying to build. Machiavelli's ultimate truth. Niccolò Machiavelli's ultimate insight about respect crystallizes into a recognition that may initially seem harsh, but ultimately proves liberating. The world respects power more than virtue, results more than intentions, and strength more than accommodation, because respect serves evolutionary functions that reward capability over compliance, effectiveness over agreeability, and the ability to create beneficial outcomes over the willingness to accept whatever outcomes others create. This insight eliminates the moral confusion that keeps people trapped in cycles of increasing effort for decreasing recognition. You don't need to be a better person to command more respect. You need to be a more strategic person who understands how to create incentive structures that make respecting you profitable while making disrespecting you costly. The person who masters respect commanding discovers that they can be more authentically generous because their generosity flows from choice rather than compulsion, more genuinely kind, because their kindness is strategic, rather than automatic, and more truly helpful, because their help serves others' development, rather than enabling continued dysfunction. Machiavellian respect, commanding, serves others as well as yourself, because it creates relationships based on mutual benefit, rather than exploitation, environments where everyone understands expectations rather than having to guess what might trigger problems, and interactions that reward good behavior rather than taking it for granted. The alternative, continuing to seek respect through accommodation, serves no one well. It enables others to remain selfish while feeling good about their selfishness because someone is willing to accommodate it. It prevents your own development into someone capable of commanding recognition through demonstrated value rather than desperate accommodation. It wastes your limited life energy on relationships and activities that consume more than they provide. Machiavelli understood that the choice between seeking and commanding respect is ultimately a choice between weakness and strength, between dependence and autonomy, between hoping for others' moral development and creating conditions that encourage others' respectful behavior, regardless of their moral inclinations. The person who chooses to command rather than seek respect discovers that this choice makes them more valuable to others who appreciate strength, more attractive to those who respect boundaries, and more useful to those who benefit from clear expectations and consistent follow-through, rather than accommodation that enables poor behavior. Your capabilities, contributions, and authentic value deserve recognition, but they will not receive it through seeking, begging, or hoping others will eventually notice and reward your virtue. They will receive recognition only when you develop the strategic intelligence to make recognition profitable for others while making disrespect costly. Respect is forced, not seeked, because human nature responds more reliably to incentive structures than to moral appeals, to consequences than to conscience, to power than to virtue. This is not a moral failing of humanity, but simply how psychological and social systems operate in reality rather than in moral theory. You can work with reality or against it, but reality will determine outcomes regardless of your moral preferences. Working with reality by commanding respect through strategic strength serves your development and others' welfare better than working against reality by seeking respect through accommodation that often enables others' dysfunction while preventing your own growth. Stop seeking respect from those who will never freely give it. Start commanding respect from those who only understand the language of credible consequences. Develop the strength to make respecting you the optimal choice for others, rather than hoping they will choose to respect you based on moral inclinations you cannot control. Machiavelli's truth awaits your implementation. Respect is forced, not seeked. Force it through strategic strength, clear boundaries, and consistent consequences. Command it through demonstrated value, reliable standards, and the courage to impose costs on those who would otherwise take your worth for granted. The respect you deserve is waiting for you to develop the power necessary to command it. Stop seeking, start commanding. Begin now. Your authentic worth deserves recognition that flows from strength rather than accommodation, power rather than pleading, strategic intelligence rather than moral superiority. Command the respect your capabilities deserve through the strategic deployment of Machiavellian principles that have governed human recognition for centuries. Respect is forced, not seeked. Learn to force it. Your dignity depends on it.